I'm Marcia. Standing in the courthouse hallway, the polished floor beneath my heels, I could feel the weight of the moment. The emergency arbitration was about to start, a battle I'd been preparing for without even knowing it. To my right, Leo sat surrounded by his lawyers, like a fortress. His mother, Vivian, was right behind him, dressed in a severe black suit, her diamond earrings glinting harshly. Our eyes met briefly, and she blinked slowly, a cold, calculating look. I took my seat across the table, unfolding my hands on my lap. I wore a soft ivory dress, a symbol of the peace I craved, the quiet strength I'd found within myself. The room was filled with attention so thick you could cut it with a knife. Leo's lawyer stood up, a slick, practiced smile on his face. This arbitration concerns the prenuptial equity clause signed by both parties. My client alleges that Ms. Marcia's emotional instability and hasty departure from the marriage breached this clause. I listened quietly as he painted a picture of me as a liability, a woman who had disrupted everything. But it didn't sting as much as I thought it would. My lawyer, Miss Thompson, rose gracefully, her eyes sharp and focused. The timeline tells a different story. Ms. Marcia's decision to leave came after a long period of emotional abuse. We have documented evidence of gaslighting, suppression, and reputational sabotage. This clause was used as a weapon against her. The room fell silent as Leo's lawyer then said, "We'd like to call a character witness, Noah Thompson, Leo's cousin." My heart sank. I remembered Noah well. We had been friendly once, but after I married Leo, he seemed to vanish into the shadows of the family's influence. Noah entered the room, looking older and more worn than I remembered. He didn't look at me as he took the stand. He raised his right hand and swore his oath. The room held its breath. Leo sat up a little straighter, a smug look on his face. Vivian allowed a small smile. And then Noah began to speak. I was asked to be here as a character witness for Leo. But I can't do that. I was in the room when that prenup clause was rewritten. It was Leo's idea. He called it a fail-safe in case Marcia ever decided to leave. He wanted a way to take a part of her company if she did. Gasps echoed through the room. Leo's face turned ashen, and Vivian's eyes widened in shock. Noah continued, "I have the emails to prove it. I've given them to Ms. Marcia's legal team this morning." I exhaled slowly. The judge then asked gently, "Miss Marcia, would you like to cross-examine?" I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and looked directly at Leo. No questions. The truth speaks for itself. A hush fell over the room, a hush filled with respect. I already knew the tide had turned. But let me take you back to how it all started. I was a young lawyer, fresh out of law school, full of dreams and ambition. I met Leo at a business event. He was charming, from a wealthy family, the Stanton clan. Their family was known for their vast business empire, spanning from real estate to tech startups. We started dating, and before I knew it, we were engaged. Leo's mother, Vivian, was a force to be reckoned with. She was cold, calculating, and always had an agenda. When it came to the prenup, she insisted on using their family lawyer. I refused out of self-respect. I hired my own counsel, Mr. Harris, an old-school lawyer who knew the law inside out. I remember sitting across from Mr. Harris, sipping lukewarm coffee. I told him, "It's not about the money. It's about what I've built, my research, my patents. I need to protect myself." He nodded and said, "We'll add a rider. No restructuring, no transfer, no integration without your written notarized consent." We were married, and I thought I was part of the family. I helped Leo's family with a major $690 million merger between the Stanton Group and a biotech firm. I worked long hours, leading the international counsel team. I was the one who crafted every clause, every detail of the merger agreement. But then, things started to change. The dinner invitations gradually stopped including my name. At board meetings, Vivian would often forget my seat. And then, one fateful night, I was invited to a formal family dinner. It was a cold winter night in New York City. The snow was just starting to dust the skyline, giving the Stanton Tower a soft, ethereal glow. I stood in the marble corridor outside the private dining room, adjusting my blazer. My heels echoed on the floor. When I entered the room, it was like a scene from a movie. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and a long glass table was filled with the Stanton clan, their shareholders, and top advisors. Everyone was dressed in expensive suits and jewelry, their expressions cold and haughty. I scanned the table for my place. There was no nameplate, just a single empty chair tucked away near the service entrance. Leo didn't even look up as I walked over. His cousin, Ryan, whispered with a half laugh, "Looks like they gave you the corner seat." I forced a smile and said, "Good view of the exit." Vivian raised her glass and said, "To family, to legacy, and to the women who keep us looking good." Her eyes flicked to me. Like Marcia here. So calm. You'd never guess she wasn't born into this world. Laughter rippled around the table. I kept my eyes forward, my back straight. I heard someone mutter, "Did they let the help in?" Leo just chuckled politely, not even bothering to look at me. During the meal, the conversation was all about business, quarterly numbers, new acquisitions. I barely touched my food. Halfway through, a young, nervous staff member placed a cloth napkin beside my plate. It was folded differently, neatly and precisely, almost like origami. I gave him a small smile. Vivian watched this and then called out, "Wipe your chin, dear. You're making us look bad." I calmly folded the napkin and placed it in my purse without saying a word. The silence that followed was colder than the snow outside. When dessert was served, I stood up to leave. My chair scraped against the floor, but no one stopped me. No one said a word. I waited for the elevator alone. Leo came out a few minutes later, adjusting his cufflinks as if nothing had happened. "Just ignore her," he said flatly. "You know how she is." I looked at him and said, "I do now." Instead of taking the elevator, I walked back to the conference wing. I unlocked my old office with the badge they'd forgotten to deactivate. My old desk was still there, beneath the tall window overlooking the city. I took out my personal laptop, the one with my own secrets. I opened the encrypted file on the Delacqua Arisen FinTech merger. There, in Clause 14D, I found the key. It stated that in case of reputational damage, legal breach, or public harm to designated fiduciary intermediaries, the escrow funds could be delayed, withheld, or reallocated by third-party counsel. And that third-party counsel was me. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a message on the Stanton family app. Ryan had posted a meme of a maid sitting at a fancy table, captioned, "When the help gets lost." Leo had liked it. I took out the cloth napkin from my pocket, folded it further, and placed it on the desk beside my laptop, a silent protest. I wrote a notice of concern regarding a fiduciary breach, citing Clause 14D and the merger ethics policy. I scheduled it to be delivered in 48 hours, giving them a chance to show some decency. The next morning, I went to the Stanton Tower, not as a wife but as the woman who had built the foundation of their new business venture. When I reached the boardroom, my seat was taken by a woman named Bella. Vivian said smoothly, "Darling, let's not make a scene. Bella is just sitting in for now." I smiled and replied, "Strange, because I never left." I sat at the far end of the table and noticed a folder labeled Succession Plan. I opened it and saw that my name was completely removed from the new leadership structure. In my place were Leo's cousin, Ethan, and Bella. I stood up and said calmly, "You replaced me on the seating chart. I wonder how fast you'll try to replace me in the merger clause you didn't write." The room fell silent. Leo stared at the table, and Bella tightened her grip on her pen. I left the boardroom and went to a nearby cafe. I called Mr. Harris and said, I need to trigger the clause. He simply replied, it's done. Within hours, the cracks in the Stanton empire began to show. Internal emails started to leak. Questions were raised about the legality of the merger and the prenup clause. Investors grew nervous, and one hedge fund even pulled out $100 million in committed capital. Leo called me several times, but I didn't answer. One evening, he showed up at my apartment. You're ruining everything, he said. For what? Pride? I looked at him and said, no, for dignity. For the fact that you can't erase me and profit at the same time. He sighed and said, it's just business. I replied, you turned our marriage into a business deal, and that's betrayal. I handed him a folder and said, you wanted me out of the seat, so I moved the whole table. He opened it and froze. It was a notice of arbitration. Then, the media got involved. A photo of me sitting alone at the end of the table went viral. Internal memos were leaked, showing how they had planned to use me only for my name and then discard me. We also had a recording of all the cruel remarks made at the dinner, which we used to file a formal complaint with the Federal Trade Commission for executive misconduct, emotional coercion, and misuse of a licensed name. As the situation worsened for the Stanton family, Leo's sister, Lily, reached out to me. We met at a small cafe. She said, I saw everything. You're the only one with the courage to stand up to them. I told her, you don't have to be part of this. You can build your own future. She nodded, her eyes filled with hope. One day, I received a small brown parcel. Inside was a mirror box that Vivian had once given me as a mocking gesture. But now, it held a single daisy and a note from Lily that said, thank you for being the woman my family refused to be. I also found Leo's personal journal, dropped off anonymously. Reading it was like a punch in the gut. The first entry was from a few weeks before we met. He wrote, Mother thinks she could be useful. She has presence. It was clear that I was never loved, I was a strategic move. As the days passed, the Stanton family's empire crumbled further. Vivian resigned from several board positions, and Leo's public image was destroyed. The news headlines were filled with stories of the Stanton family's downfall. I decided to leave the chaos behind. I took a quiet flight back to my hometown. I walked through the garden where I used to play as a child. I placed the old mirror box, now with a photo of my mother and a pressed daisy, under a tree. I whispered, for the girl I used to be, and walked away without looking back. I started a new chapter in my life. I joined a local art workshop, where there were no corporate politics, just the smell of wood and the feel of clay in my hands. I named my new art labeled Daisy and Ash, a symbol of resilience and new beginnings. Orders started to come in, slowly but surely. I no longer needed the Stanton empire. I had found my freedom, my peace, and a door that I opened on my own. Have you ever been underestimated and risen above it? Let me know in the comments. I read every one.